on Iraq in a masterful way by bringing out Rumsfeld's own words. And I think what you mean by bird dogging is politically challenging. You know, these heads of the state repression. This is really important, and I just wanted to introduce Stephanie Rupa, standing here, who is the director of World Can't Wait's project called War Criminals Watch, which actually does this. If you go to warcriminalswatch.org, you can see a list of all the public appearances of mainly the Bush regime war criminals, but we are starting to add in Petraeus and so forth, because they are becoming the Obama administration war criminals as well. And we're challenging them politically on the basis of their lies. It's really important. So if you want to know more about this, see Stephanie. I won't forget our sisters in pink, and there's many people doing good work. Stephanie organized this panel, and tomorrow, actually, Medea is going to be speaking on another panel World Can't Wait did on drones, and I hope you'll all look at the list. The third presenter that we have today that we're very glad to have is Hassen from the National Lawyers Guild, and he's going to be speaking about some of the implications of the surveillance. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you guys for such a great overview. I guess I want to start with a question. How many people have heard someone say, "I have nothing to hide, so I'm not"?
Yeah.
And I just, I was here last about a year ago, and this stuff had just come out, and the idea of this is to kind of look at this a year later. How have things changed, and where are we going? And I think that question is really important, that we all, as people who are activists and organizers in this room, are able to counter that, right? And really, that's not even the question to ask, right? I don't care what you have to hide. That's not the point. It's who has the power to watch, right? It's about that power, and that's really the way we have to frame it, to understand where we're at and where we're going. So I hope that no one says that anymore. They probably do, but really, it's important to reframe that. Like, as Bill mentioned, that power to surveil, the power of mass surveillance is something that I really think no society in human history has grappled. I mean, there's that technological power has never existed before, and I mean, the closest, maybe in the Middle Ages they banned the wizards or something, but like, there's nothing, there's no reality that's ever been. It's unfathomed power, really, and so we're at a time there are no clear answers. We're going to have to come up with the answers of how we deal with this. Let me ask everyone another question. How many of you consider yourselves to be criminals?
I want to be a criminal.
So, a follow-up question. A follow-up question. How many of you know how many federal laws there are? How many federal criminal laws are there? Just someone give me a guess.
10,000.
Yeah. I'll tell you right now, all your guesses are as good as the legal experts. Like, nobody actually knows the answer to this question. Right? So, that actually has fundamental implications when you're talking about a mass surveillance society, right? The law actually cannot be applied equally. It is not possible for the law to be applied equally. It is applied through arbiters who are police, law enforcement, prosecutors, right? And so, we have, somewhere between 23,000 pages was one of the surveys of the federal law that was done in the 80s, right? And they just, they love to write. So, I mean, I don't know how much has exploded since then, but someone who actually studied this intensively, John Baker at Louisiana State University. Here's a quote from him. He said, "There is no one in the United States over age 18 who cannot be indicted for some federal crime." Right? So it's really a matter of who do they want to arrest? Who do they want to indict? Who do they want to catch? And when they have everyone's communications indefinitely, that power is amplified to, like I said before, unfathomable extent. And we know also, it was a common line of the administration of the various crooks and liars in the administration that they would always say, well, this has never been abused, right? Obama, I think, said no one is reading your emails, right? I mean, that was their line early on, and before they really knew probably the extent of what Snowden had released. I mean, they still don't know the extent to what he released, which should say something about how much we should trust them with this information, that they don't even know what was taken from them, right? The only reason they know it exists is because he made it public and didn't sell it to the Chinese or the Russians, right? So it's an interesting criticism of theirs that they say that. But so we already know this has been abused. Love is a term of art within the NSA, which means spying on your lovers or potential lovers, or stalking your ex-girlfriend, right? And as Bill also mentioned, the DEA retroactively creating search warrants. You know, they get NSA intel, and then they tell the local cops, "Hey, go arrest this guy for a parking lot," you know, but they know they have the goods. That is such a fundamental violation of our constitutional system. I mean, you know, to me it's shocking that it's just like, okay, shut that thing down, right? Like, shut him down, because that's just tearing the Constitution to shreds. And you know, another thing that has also been exposed through the Snowden revelations that I think should be scary to all of us are these embarrassment plots where they've targeted people and gained their gathered up their communications, and of their porn watching habits or dirty sex messages, right? That type of tactic is so reminiscent of the 60s and 70s COINTELPRO and similar programs that were used against the bad guys at the time, the communists. Martin Luther King, for example, famously was sent a letter by J. Edgar Hoover trying to expose extramarital affair. So it's important to understand that these things, as we learn about them at the NSA level, and the few stories we've had of the DEA or other law enforcement using them, that these things will always, eventually, they're gonna. The only way to think about it is, do I want the cop on the corner to have this information? Because that's where it's going, and there's no way that they're going to build this kind of system and not use it. It's kind of like, Field of Dreams. If you build it, right, that's the fundamental issue. If you build it, it's going to get used and it's going to get abused. I'll give an example. You know, we've seen enforcement structure. One of the things that was built is called a fusion center, and that's there's I think there's over 100 of them around the country, and that's where the nexus of federal to local law enforcement and a heavy corporate community tie-in also. So the fusion centers we've seen, you know, we only get little bits of what's actually going on, mostly through like really sloppy police work or really diligent in Freedom of Information Act work. So one example in Austin, Texas, with Occupy Austin was infiltrated with six undercover police officers, and through records requests out of criminal charges that came against some of those Occupy activists, they found out, you know, they were charged with some felony for doing like a lockdown kind of thing. And then they did a bunch of records requests at the Fusion Center and basically found out that one of the undercovers that had been infiltrating Occupy Austin actually built the mechanism that they locked themselves, which was like a PVC pipe, and they locked their hands together, right? But then they were charged with felony for using a criminal instrument, they called that, built by the police, right? And then the police officer said, well, I wanted to build it to make sure they were safe. And that's the line that they give every time. Another case of a really important federal court case that's happening in Washington State, a group called Port Militarization Resistance out of Olympia, Washington. They were basically peaceniks. Like they would sit in front of tanks. Like that's what they did. They were dedicated to nonviolence, and they would find out when armaments were being shipped through civilian ports to Iraq and Afghanistan, and they would sit in front of the tank. And that was, you know, that was the extent of their criminal activity, which was civil disobedience, obviously. But they also did rallies and anti-war protests. They did a lot of things. They were infiltrated by an Army employee named John Towery for years. He was in their group, organizing with them. He had access to all their communications, all their emails, and he was sending it straight to the Army and through the Fusion Center. You know, some of the documents have been released. This case was only found out about, again, through very diligent Freedom of Information requests, and kind of, again, sloppy police work, kind of where the Army wants to make everything a secret, but the local cops kind of are like, they want to show that they're with the army. They want to be tough guys. So they are a little more verbose and a little more loose with their documents. So this a researcher got a hold of it, and so one of these activists, it was put on a domestic terrorist list, right? And the description was he got aggressive at a protest, and that was the justification to put him on a terrorist list, right? So, and he wasn't even Muslim, right? Like, so it's really it shows the kind of that this stuff is never going to stay at the federal level. It's always going to get. It's always going to creep down. And these terms, terrorism, radicalizer, all these terms that they use to justify these things are stretched to the point of absurdity, right? Like, I mean, I joke about the term terrorism. I think it's a term that actually has no definition. At least legally, it doesn't. I mean, it has a very real cultural definition. It's like they're looking at me. But so what? I just want to. I'll wrap up in a minute here, but I think we really need to challenge what does a surveillance society look like, and I think that it creates what this type of surveillance and what having so much information online and in digital format creates is it really creates a society where there's a whole new spectrum of privilege and elites, right? Where we create a class of elites who are allowed to be forgotten, whose pasts, if people with particular access or enough influence can maybe get their information erased, but or not searched. But the rest of us are stuck with every act and deed or potential crime that we've ever committed. And mind you, you've all committed a crime. I promise you. That they've never, that will never be erased from your history. It's like, we're like, think about it like a credit score or something, where we're creating that type of infrastructure and information on all of us, but with drastic, it's like, it's not like you're going to get denied the prepaid phone. You're going to get denied a job. You or not. You don't even know. I mean, think about how the no-fly list has been implemented. It's one of the biggest cases. A woman in California litigated for 7 years because she was put on a no-fly list. Right? They don't give you any answers. There's no straightforward way to challenge it, and it turns out it's a clerical error. After 7 years, right? So that's kind of a really important aspect of what this type of mass surveillance will create in our society. You know, I think it's interesting to note that in Europe there's like this right to forget law that's going through that is forcing data providers to actually erase stuff. So it has like drastic consequences for who can run for office, right? I mean, I don't know if this is good or bad, but Bill Clinton probably could have got through under a system like this. I mean, maybe we'd be in a better place with that. But if you think about the people who could get through, it's like either the people who can have enough influence to get to not have their information or exposed, or the people who are so boring and like and unexperienced and just uninteresting that you know that has its own set of problems, right? I mean, so I just to close up, I just want to think about a little thought experiment here, like, you know, when I go to DC, I'm always struck. They've just opened a new Martin Luther King memorial, and I always think when I see it, I think like if they really wanted to make a Martin Luther King memorial, they'd scrape J. Edgar Hoover's name off the FBI. Right? Like, those two things cannot exist in the same city. They're like a mile apart, right? And it's you know, it's like thesis, antithesis. And you know, what would have happened if the Alabama Fusion Center had gotten a hold of all of SNCC's not emails, but you know, telephone calls or communications, right? Like, if we look at some of the great movements of our history, what does it mean if they could have been nipped at the bud and pulled over? You know, instead of marching to Selma, it's being pulled over. Then everyone gets pulled over for traffic stops and spends a few nights in the clink, and you know, the whole thing is disorganized. Like, that power exists, and you know, J. Edgar Hoover did a lot with what he had, right? But he didn't have the ability to go backwards in time. They had to put agents on people. They had to really put a lot of legwork into trying to destroy Martin Luther King, and they ultimately didn't succeed. They did succeed with the Black Panthers to a large extent, but so I think it has, you know, we can look at our past and not too distant to really understand what this power magnified could look like. And so I guess just to say what is it that we can do? I think there's some lessons, a year later there's some lessons. One lesson is individuals matter, right? Like individual acts can be massive, right? Sometimes they're not, but they can be, and you don't know, and you have to do what is right. You have to just keep doing it, and and I think also, when I look, every time I look at that picture of Edward Snowden with the EFF hoodie, right? It's like organizations matter. Building these organizations and supporting these organizations matters, right? And the ideas that are promoted are important. People like Edward Snowden, they needed access to the ideas of the free internet, and and people need to be promoting those things in whatever way, right? So and I think the other thing we've learned is that we need to learn about encryption. I know it's scary, but like we all need to learn about encryption, and that lesson is being taken to heart. I mean, I even heard that Google is talking about doing encryption. Now, I don't know if I trust it necessarily, but if they do, they're talking about doing encryption. That's not something they were contemplating a year ago, right? Not even in jest, because it goes against their entire business model. But like we need to, we're at a point in history where we need to start understanding that. Like, if everyone was encrypting, that would force the NSA to be targeted, right? Because at the end of the day, there's nothing that's 100%. You're never going to get 100% digital security. I mean, it's just not possible. The NSA is very, very smart. They're very powerful, and like they can, if they want to individually get you, they're gonna get you. but that's not the point. The point is, if we're all using encryption, they can't just they won't have that ability to go back through our history, and we control, the term I use is called data sovereignty, where we have sovereignty over our data, and so I think that what the last thing that I think it's important that we, especially activists and people on the left and people who are interested in social justice movements, really start to bridge the gap between the technology and the free internet and the social justice, because those two things, and they back and forth. I think I'm a member of an organization called May First People Link that is I think a good example of bridging those gaps. But I think that to really make affirmative steps to try to build relationships and understand what our data is doing and where we're putting our data, and support the organizations. I'll name a few. Rise Up, the Guardian Project is, the Dark Mail is a project that Ladar Levinson, a guy who the FBI tried to take who supposedly Edward Snowden was using his email. We need to support these organizations and help build them and make them part of our